Hi guys. Today we're gonna do a recap of the trades from yesterday as well as this morning, and go over some picks for tomorrow based on earnings reports. So, being that this is summer, things are kind of slow in the market. Volume is dried up. It's kind of light, and the best way for me anyway to get successful trades is to trade on momentum names, which include those stocks that have reported earnings recently. So I usually play earnings the very day after the company reports to get the most momentum and the best kind of action off of the open. So a couple of names that we looked at yesterday that we traded, or at least looked to trade today, were Zillow for one, and AAOI I mentioned in the last video for a play this morning on earnings. I didn't go into too much detail on AAOI, so I'll go ahead and go over that with you. We also looked to trade Disney this morning over after earnings, which we never took a trade on because it didn't really have the action that we were anticipating. And then we'll get into a couple of names that I can currently have as a little bit of a longer term swing trades, which include GDX, which is the gold miners ETF. We'll talk about where we're going with GDX, where we're thinking about going with Zillow, and what's coming up for tomorrow. So we'll start with Zillow. As you know from the last video, we were watching Zillow off of earnings on the 6th after hours. So what we did is the thought on Zillow was that it would potentially crack through this resistance, this support level here, which is this longer term, about 2-3 year support level trend line. So we thought that it might do that, but it actually showed some pretty resilient activity around the line. So we didn't take a trade too much on it yesterday. I did buy a little bit into the close of the day in anticipation of just a small bounce today, which it did do. So, and I'll kind of explain why I did that. So as you can see here on the left side, the stock yesterday maintained. It just dipped slightly below that trend line and kind of maintained bounce a few times. And then, you can see there are some higher lows going into the close, and it showed some good action. I was looking for it to go over 50 prior to buying it because that was the high of this day. And so I bought a little bit in anticipation around here in anticipation of today's move, with a stop that would be this trend line. So I figured it was a pretty good risk control there by having a stop mentally around the $48 level. I actually bought a call option on it, so it wasn't buying the stock outright, so that even further reduced my risk on this stock. So this morning, as you can see here on the right side, on the left-hand side chart, but as I'm moving it to the right, you can see the action right off the open was for it to kind of magnetically, like magic, go up to that 5106 pivot that we talked about yesterday and bounced hard right off of it. And that's the pivot that we talked about over here on the right. If you look, it's a pivot from earlier this year, and then of course it had a couple of points. It's actually a little complex trend line as well. It had some pivot points, 3 or 4 pivot points on this 5106 level. So my target originally this morning was to buy this at the open once it crossed over 50. So you can see it crossed over 50 right at the open almost in that first 15-minute bar. And then to trade it up until I thought it would go to this 5106 level and either reverse or it would come right through it and start going towards the 5205 level, which is the overnight high from yesterday, or the from earnings day rather, or the 200-day moving average. So it didn't get that far, but I did sell most of my position right here at 5106, and you can see it bounced down hard. It went right back down to like close to one of its moving averages. Let me put the 5-minute chart up. Yeah, so you can see it came back down to the around the 50 moving average on the 5-minute chart, and kept going. It came right back up through the 5106 level, but turned back around. It's a pretty volatile stock there. So it had some good moves today. I made most of my trade in the beginning of the day, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay without having got that extra. I think I sold it right around here, 5103. It's an extra 50 cents or so, but I'm okay. I got about $1.05 off of the trade this morning, and even more from the trade from yesterday. So I was fine selling it, getting that first early morning move, and not having to worry about it the rest of the day. So what I'm going to be looking for in Zillow going forward is for to see how it acts around this area here. I really want to see if it maintains its uptrend, or if it ends up having any kind of reversal. And so, as it moves up into this 5205 area, as well as the moving average here, which is about 5223, I'll look for some stalling and perhaps even a reversal over the next couple of days. And I would like to see it come back down. I mean, it is right now down below 5106, but it could potentially drift back up a little bit, depending on the action of the stock and how the market is. The market kind of sold off really hard towards the end of the day, so the last few minutes of the day, so that could be a potential as to why this stock also sold off hard. Other than that, it was looking like it was on the uptrend until the end of the day, when most stocks had a little sell-off. So I'll keep an eye. If it doesn't come up at all and starts to roll over, I will wait until it gets below this longer term trend line. I'll look for a break of this trend line before making any other trades on the downside right now. But if it continues to go up, I will look for a reversal at the 200-day moving average. And again, if it shows strength and keeps going up, I'm not going to chase it, I don't think. Although there is a pretty big gap to fill, so I may take a small position. But if it keeps going up and is strong past this resistance area, but my next target would be this 54.74 pivot, and then this trend line. And I just don't think it's going to get back above this trend line. It would have to be really strong to get up there in the next few days anyway. But if it does, I anticipate a reversal off of the longer term trend line there, shorter term trend line rather, and I'll look to short it there as well. That would be, pretty amazing if it went right back up to that trend line, and it'll be a perfect entry point on the short side for me, really. So that's what's going on with Zillow. Next stock that we traded was AAOI. Today, this stock it had earnings overnight, and you can see here just from the overnight action, it spiked up hard to a trend line. This is a really long-term trend line. I'll put it on the weekly so you can see it. It goes back down to last July at the peak of AAOI. This is a volatile stock. It's a former runner, I guess. It's a former spiker. It definitely has had some spiky moves and up moves throughout the past couple of years, especially in 2017. It was a really hot stock. So it could have technically gone either way. Personally, I was in the camp that it would be going back to the downside off of some pretty strong pivot resistance here. So you can see here this pivot and also a gap fill at 49.87 here, and here. So that's what I was looking at for its resistance. If it got through that, I would have traded it to the long side for sure, because it would have crossed through pretty hard pivot, and I would have at least traded it for a gap fill, or potentially a fill to this first 54.86 pivot level that I have marked there from right here. So, but my thought was it would probably fade to the downside. And the reason is you can see here, there are some lower highs going into the open. So that just to me signaled weakness. And it did show weakness. If you check it out on the minute, this is the minute chart. It had some pretty good weakness going into the open and never did get back up above that first 5-minute high. So pretty great trade to the short side. If you took it off the open, you can see here, it never got back up to its trend line. So I mean, spike into the trend line and then just never was able to get back up there. So shorting it right here after the first 5-minute bar would have been okay too, honestly. But looking at it on the minute chart, you just wanted to see if it ever went back up to this trend line. It never did. So right off the open, it started just falling. So the short point for me would have been right here at 45.20 personally, with a stop above right at the high of the day. First 5-minute or first 1-minute bar is what my stop would have been, which is 46.01. So had I shorted it here, would have made a pretty hefty profit, going down about $3. It did have some sideways action the rest of the day. Let me put it back on the 15, but it continued to go down all the way down to 40. So I didn't get in this trade today, unfortunately. I was focusing on some other things, but it was a great trade. If you took it, good job. So that was AAOI. Great earnings trade, great fade from a long-term trend line to the downside. So really good trade that I unfortunately didn't take. So moving on, we can go to some GDX, which is a stock, an ETF for gold miners, which we talked about on the last video. I'm short GDX from early yesterday, and I'm still in the money here on the stock. My stop is $20.90, which is a pretty big pivot point here. We talked about all the resistance that it would have to get through if it got to get back up there. So that's my stop. I mean, it is choppy today, but we'll see how it acts tomorrow, and then we have a stop set. So that's all there is to that. For the stock picks for tomorrow, there are a couple stocks that have had earnings today that I wanted to talk about. One is Yelp. Yelp had earnings overnight, so it did spike hard from 38 to 44.74. And that's a pretty big move for Yelp. Yelp, as you guys know, has been kind of a volatile stock over the years also. So if you take a look at I'm just going to go into like the max available on Yelp. So this is back 5-6 years now. I've put a trend line from the all-time high to the last high, and I've drawn a trend line to the downside there, and also drew a trend line up from this low, which was almost a double bottom. Kind of up through the last downturn of the stock here, which is at 26.89 or thereabouts. So I wanted to show you that to kind of just see where these lines came from. But it has been pretty volatile. It looks like, honestly, it looks like a bubble stock going from 14 up to 100 down to 14, and it's now in this little area right here, which to me looks like a bear flag, to be honest. It looks like a giant bear flag, but it's very choppy and volatile. But off of earnings, the way I'm looking at it, and this is the daily chart, I mean, you can see how choppy this stock is. It's pretty crazy. So I usually take a look at the weekly on this because it's a little bit more sane looking. So you can see here that this shorter term uptrend, it did pierce down through that uptrend a couple days ago and tried to make it back up yesterday, and it wasn't able to. Now, obviously, today it had earnings, so it has gapped up into this range here again, and it is sitting at around the 44.74 level, so right around here. Still underneath this longer term trend line. So 44, if you look at let's look at this, yep. So this is what it looks like right now with the earnings gap. So it'll be still underneath this long-term trend line, and looks pretty good for a, in my opinion, for a fade off the open. So I mean, it may spike up a little bit on the open, and you have a couple of resistance levels that I'll tell you about that you can look for a shorting opportunity. First one being this longer term resistance. This trend line here should be acting as resistance, and that's right here at the 45.50-ish level. So just keep an eye on 45.60. So keep an eye on that level, and if it pops above it, the next resistance is 48.40. It's the next pivot here. You can see on the weekly chart. These are the most recent highs. There, it's almost a triple top there at 48.40. So those are the two resistance levels I'm looking at: the longer term downtrend line and the 48.40 pivot. So I mean, it looks pretty strong right now, but let's see how it acts in the morning. If it kind of grinds higher up to this trend line and backs off, I'll look to see what it does at the open. I'd like to see it kind of just stay around here and maybe even kind of get a little weaker with lower highs, just like AAOI did, and that would be a little bit better signal for me. But honestly, it can get up to this 45.60 level and, you know, still be a great short off of that level. So those are the two levels I'm looking at. The targets, once it hits this trend line, obviously I'll be continuing to watch it and moving my stops down as if it comes down. Target would be this trend line here, which is the uptrend line that I just showed you that it had pierced through. If it happens to go down below that level, which it very well could, because you can see it did some damage there just in the last couple of week or two. This is the weekly, so this is week or two. So I'm going to give you some targets for that. So this looks like a good pivot right here at about 36.31, 36.41 actually. Now let me change that up. So that looks like a good target to the downside if it crosses through this trend line here. So you have some targets for Yelp, and I think it will be a really good trade if it goes if it starts having some momentum in one direction or another. I personally don't want to trade Yelp to the upside, but it does have the capability of piercing through this level, and there's quite a bit of room above that just in case, you know, you thought about trading it. You know, you can see it's come down. You saw that little Christmas tree formation. It looked like a big Christmas tree from 14 to 108 or 104 or whatever that was. So there's quite a bit of air up here for it to get through. So that's Yelp. The next one on my list is Roku. Roku's also kind of a new IPO, newer in last year. At the end of the year, it was one of the last IPOs of the year in October. So Roku had earnings again tonight, and it is also in kind of a downtrend right now. Just barely. It's a very volatile, kind of choppy action here. It looks a little bit like it could be a cup and handle, or could be turning into a reverse Head and Shoulders, and that's a possibility. So with Roku, what I'm looking at are these levels. This downtrend line here from the all-time high of 58.80. As well as this pivot here at 51.91 and this pivot here at 52.70. So Roku is pretty strong off its earnings. If it happens to pop through the 51, first the trend line, which is right where it is. If it happens to go through 51.91 and 52.70, I would look for a buy to the upside target of. I might set my target right here around 57.50, but 58.80 is the all-time high. So to be conservative, you got 56.76 right here, which is this lower lower pivot. So let me check the daily. Yeah, I think my pivot is going to be right there, 57.44. or thereabouts. So if it pops through, it has to get above this trend line and these two levels for me for my own personal view. I mean, you could potentially be, kind of early in the trade and trade it long right above 51.91, which is this pivot here. And then your target could be 52.70 for a short-term target. And then if it pops above that, you have this whole area here to 57.40 ish. So that's Roku. I will of course pay attention to whether it goes up or down off of this trend line, because it does have the potential to hit the trend line and bounce back. Right now it's gapping up to this trend line here, so it's right at it. So it could potentially just fade back down just like it did right here. And here, I mean, it's just fading off of pivot, some resistance. So it's got a little resistance up there. So we'll see how it acts. If it fades off the resistance, I'll take the first 5-minute bar and trade down. Once it crosses down below the first 5-minute bar, I'll take a short trade on it. And, my target would be back at the high of today, which I think was around like 47.50 or so. So that's my take on Roku. Last but not least, booking.com. Booking.yeah. So I'm only talking about this. I'll talk about this briefly because this actually was supposed to report earnings tonight. And it had some very crazy action off of that pre-earnings report. It did not report earnings tonight. Instead, it had put out a PR that it was going to report earnings tomorrow. So you see here the spike to the downside right into this gap and into these couple of pivots down here. And then it's just kind of hovering right around here at 2019. See level 2. 2012 to 2019, yeah. So it's right in this area. Still down $25 from where it closed. And earnings haven't even been reported. For me, this could of course go either way. It's booking.com. It's a strong stock. It's been completely like parabolic almost over the course of the past couple of years. But it looks like it's in a little flag formation here from this first quarter earnings. It's just kind of been chopping around this area, but it's been putting in lower highs. You can see where the arrows are. Those are lower highs on the weekly chart. And it has this shorter term trend line, which should act as resistance. So my take on this, if you go to the daily, is that if it does spike up on earnings, if it has good earnings and decides to spike up, I would be looking at this trend line up here at 2160 for some resistance, and I would look to fade off of that trend line if it gets there. I mean, it could potentially get there, but I don't know. It also has, this resistance here, these little pivots that are, a little bit more short term, but they're still there. You've got some little pivots right here as well. So, if it doesn't make it up there and reverses here or here, I'll still take you see this 2163 actually has a pretty good confluence with the trend line. So that's a good one. Obviously, if it doesn't make it past 2132 and starts turning back over, you could short it after the first bar to go negative, like below the first negative bar on the 1 minute or 5 minute, however you trade. If it goes straight down from the open, I would be looking for a gap fill down to this level right here, about 1920 is where the gap fills, which is also corresponds with this short-term uptrend trend line. So I'll show you on the weekly. It's this line right here. Sorry, this is a long-term. This is the long-term trend line from 2015. So that corresponds with the bottom of this gap here on the daily chart, which you can see clearly here. This gap. So that corresponds with the long-term trend line. So I would be looking for, if it doesn't go up at all, if it's fading down or staying right around here, I'd look for it to fade down to 1920, and that would be my target. Of course, it has the capability of getting below that. Then there's another uptrend line here that's shorter term, right around the 1887 level. And then you can see there's a lot of air underneath that all the way down to 1713. You've got some little gaps along the way that you could potentially use as pivots. But I think it probably spikes and then comes back down. But it looks like this must be action that sometimes, it doesn't even report earnings. It has action like this. That could be negative too. So you never know. Just wanted to give you a heads up on what I thought booking was going to be doing tomorrow. And we shall see in the morning how it turns out for booking for Roku and for Yelp. So, and we'll also continue to watch Zillow and GDX. So thanks for tuning in. I hope that whatever little information that I provided you today, you find useful. If you do, please follow me or subscribe if you'd like, and you can be alerted when I put new videos up. This is really just me sharing my thoughts with you on how I trade. Do with it what you will, but I don't pretend to be a superstar trader or anything. I do it for fun, and because I like to share my knowledge, I am sharing it with you here. So I hope you find it useful. Thanks again, and have a great night.